It was a freezing evening on a quiet street when a kind-hearted girl stopped her old red bicycle after seeing a little boy shivering alone on the sidewalk. Everyone had passed him by except her. She didn't know that the child she wrapped in her jacket was the son of one of the richest men in the city, and that this simple act of kindness would change both of their lives forever. And before we continue, let me wish you peace and good health. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? The wind that evening carried the sharp bite of early winter, curling through the narrow streets of Asheville and whispering against the rusted bicycles chained outside the old grocery store. The sky was bruised with clouds, the kind that promised a hard frost by morning. 7-year-old Clara Hayes pedaled her second-hand pink bike slowly along the sidewalk, her breath coming in little white puffs. A small wicker basket, patched with tape and ribbon, rattled at the front, filled with paper bags tied with string. Each one held 3 cookies, her Sweet Hope Packs, as she called them, sold for $2 apiece. Her mother had coughed all morning, the kind of cough that sounded deep and wet, like something tearing inside. Medicine cost more than they could make in a week, but Clara believed if she sold enough cookies, maybe the pharmacy would still let her pay a little at a time. She had learned not to think about what would happen if they didn't. She just kept pedaling, one street at a time. Cars passed, spraying mist from shallow puddles. People hurried home from work, collars turned up, faces buried in scarves. A few looked at her, then looked away. A girl on a bike selling cookies wasn't unusual in this part of town, just another reminder of something folks didn't want to see. But Clara didn't mind. She smiled, her cheeks red from the cold, and rang her little silver bell. "Fresh cookies! Homemade cookies!" she called softly, her voice almost swallowed by the wind. Halfway down Maple Avenue, she saw him. A small boy sat curled against the brick wall of Murphy's hardware store, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his arms wrapped tight around himself. He looked about 5. His sweater was fine, navy blue, thick wool, but he had no coat. His shoes were thin, his face streaked with tears, and his lips had turned the shade of fading violets. Clara's feet froze on the pedals. For a long moment, she just stared, her heart thumping. People kept walking. A man in a business suit glanced down and moved on. A woman clutching shopping bags stepped around him without slowing. A teenager passed, earbuds in, eyes on the ground. The boy sobbed once, quietly, almost a hiccup of fear. Clara leaned her bike against the wall and approached. Careful and slow, her mother had told her, that's how you go near a frightened animal. "Hey there," she said softly. "You okay?" The boy lifted his face. His eyes were wide, green, and full of panic. I can't find my daddy," he whispered, shivering so hard the words came out in pieces. "He was yelling and I ran and now I don't know where I am." Clara's chest tightened. Without thinking, she unbuttoned her purple jacket, the only one she owned, and wrapped it around his small shoulders. The wind bit through her sweater, but she didn't care. "It's all right," she said. "You're safe now. I'm Clara." He blinked at her. "Ethan. Hi, Ethan. Let's get you somewhere warm." She held out her hand. "Can you stand up?" He nodded, sniffling. When he tried to rise, his knees buckled, so she helped him onto the front of her bike, sitting sideways across the handlebars. "Hold on tight, okay?" she said, steadying him. "We'll go slow." The old bicycle creaked under their combined weight as she pushed off. The sky had gone darker, the first flakes of snow drifting lazily through the streetlights. She pedaled carefully, the cold stinging her ears, her breath ragged. Ethan clung to her arm, trembling. Every few seconds, she told him it would be okay, though she wasn't sure how. The streets of Asheville blurred under the soft, white fall of snow. Clara's small hands gripped the handlebars until her knuckles turned pale. She didn't know where to go. Home was too far, the air too cold, but she remembered the small community center on 5th Street. They had heaters there, sometimes even cocoa if the volunteers were still around. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and right now that was enough. The boy's breathing was shallow against her sleeve. "You're gonna be all right," she murmured. "We'll find your daddy soon, I promise." A truck rumbled past, honking once in irritation. Clara flinched, steering closer to the sidewalk. She was cold to the bone now, her sweater soaked through. But every time she looked at Ethan's blue lips, she pedaled harder. The lights of the community center finally appeared ahead, a dull orange glow through frosted glass. When they reached the door, she leaned the bike against the steps and half-carried Ethan inside. Warmth hit her face like a soft wave. The lobby smelled of coffee and paper. An old volunteer looked up from behind the desk, startled. "Oh, honey, what happened to him?" "He was outside," Clara said, breathless. "He's freezing." The woman hurried around the counter, wrapping Ethan in a blanket. "You did right bringing him here, sweetheart. What's your name?" "Clara Hayes." "And yours, young man?" Ethan," he stammered. "Well, Ethan, you're safe now," the woman said gently, guiding him toward the couch near the radiator. Clara followed, rubbing her arms for warmth. Her jacket still hung around the boy's shoulders, far too big for him, but holding what little heat was left. "Sit, dear," the volunteer urged, fetching another blanket. "I'll call the police, all right. They'll find his father." Clara nodded. "Please don't get him in trouble," she whispered. "He was just scared." Outside, the wind howled through the eaves. Inside, the little room filled with the hiss of the radiator and the small sound of children breathing. Ethan's head drooped, his lashes fluttering as he drifted toward sleep. Clara stayed close, tucking the blanket around him like her mother did on long nights. Not far away, across town, a man in an expensive coat ran through the rain-slicked streets, his voice hoarse from shouting his son's name. Michael Prescott had never known fear like this. Boardrooms, rivals, money problems. All of it meant nothing compared to the emptiness of that single word echoing back at him, Ethan. He stopped at every corner, showed the boy's picture to strangers, called the police twice. By the time his security team located the abandoned car near Maple Avenue, Michael was already running toward 5th Street, his shoes soaked, his breath burning. When he burst into the community center, the door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. The volunteer at the desk jumped. "Sir?" Michael's eyes swept the room, then froze. Near the radiator, wrapped in a thin purple jacket, sat his son, and beside him, a barefoot girl in a threadbare sweater, holding his tiny hand. "Daddy?" Ethan's voice broke the silence as he stumbled from the couch. Michael dropped to his knees, catching him in an embrace so fierce it stole his breath. "Oh, thank God," he whispered, kissing the boy's hair again and again. "I thought I'd lost you." Behind him, Clara stood quietly, hugging herself. Her feet were red from the cold, her hair damp, but she smiled when she saw them together. The man looked up then, really looked, and their eyes met. For a heartbeat, he couldn't speak. He saw the child's trembling hands, the empty basket near the door, the way she shivered without a coat. "You," he began. "You found him?" She shook her head. "He was just cold. I couldn't leave him there." Michael swallowed hard, still holding Ethan. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Clara." "Clara Hayes." He looked at her again, at the purity of her small act, and something inside him cracked the hard shell that had built up over years of loss and silence. "Thank you, Clara," he said quietly. "You saved my boy." She blushed, unsure what to do with such words. Anyone would have helped, but Michael knew that wasn't true. He'd seen the cameras later, the footage of dozens who had walked by. Only one had stopped. "Let's get you home," he said. "Both of you look frozen." Clara glanced down at her bare feet and the basket of cookies she'd forgotten. "I should go. My mom's waiting." "Where do you live?" "On 8th Street, near the laundromat." Michael nodded, slipping off his coat and placing it around her shoulders. "Then let me drive you." Outside, the snow had grown thicker, settling over the sidewalks in soft sheets. Clara sat in the back seat, Ethan curled up beside her. The car smelled faintly of leather and pine, a world apart from her tiny apartment. She watched the city slide past, lights flickering through the fogged windows. At her stop, she thanked him, clutching the coat tight. "I'll bring it back." Michael smiled for the first time that night. "Keep it, Clara." He paused. "And thank your mother for raising someone so brave." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. "Good night, sir." When the car drove away, its red taillights vanished into the curtain of snow. Clara stood under the street lamp for a long time, her breath misting in the cold, the purple jacket still missing from her shoulders, but a strange warmth blooming in her chest. Inside the car, Michael glanced at his sleeping son and whispered, "Sometimes the people with the least to give end up giving the most." And outside, under the quiet snowfall, a little girl pushed her bicycle home through the frozen streets, unaware that her small act of kindness had just changed 3 lives forever. The Prescott mansion sat high above the valley, a wide house of glass and cedar that looked out toward the fog-draped ridges of the Blue Ridge Mountains. In the mornings, the mist rolled in so thick it swallowed the driveway, leaving only the faint outline of the iron gates. Inside, silence had become the language of the house. Every footstep echoed, every door clicked, shut a little too loudly. Michael Prescott had built this place to keep the world out, and somewhere along the way, it had done its job too well. He rose early, drank his coffee black, and scanned emails in the glow of his tablet while the city below still slept. To the world, he was a success story, a man who'd taken his father's small logistics firm and turned it into a national corporation. To those who worked for him, he was precise, disciplined, distant. No one would have guessed that beneath the expensive suits and clean numbers lay a man whose world had cracked the night his wife died, giving birth to their son. He had never spoken of her again. The nursery remained untouched, the soft yellow curtains closed. Ethan was raised by nannies who came and went like changing seasons, all of them polite, none of them lasting long. Michael provided every comfort money could buy: tutors, doctors, private lessons, but there was always a distance, a kind of polite love that never reached the eyes. That morning, 2 days after the storm, the house felt different. Ethan was quiet, calmer somehow, sitting at the kitchen counter with a blanket around his shoulders. His new purple jacket hung on the chair beside him. The cook, Mrs. Langford, set a plate of pancakes in front of him, smiling. "You've got yourself a new friend, young man," she teased. Ethan looked up from his syrup-drowned plate. "Her name's Clara. She helped me." "I know, dear," Mrs. Langford said. "Your father told us. You should have seen the look on his face when he brought you home. Looked like he'd seen an angel." Michael stood by the window, cup in hand, watching the clouds move over the mountains. He hadn't slept much. The image of that barefoot girl haunted him, her trembling smile, the way she'd wrapped her little coat around his son without thinking twice. Something about her eyes, wide but steady, reminded him of the person he used to be before life taught him how to hide. He heard small footsteps behind him. Ethan tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, can we go find her?" Michael hesitated. "Why?" "She gave me her jacket," Ethan said. "You told me we should always give back." Michael blinked. That was something his wife used to say. For a moment he didn't trust his own voice. "We'll see, buddy," he murmured. After breakfast, he called his assistant, Marjorie Kane. Her tone was clipped, efficient. "You canceled 2 meetings yesterday. The board wants a statement about your disappearance during the storm." "Handle it," Michael said. "Of course," she replied, then added, "Sir, the community center sent a thank you note addressed to you. It mentions the girl's name, Clara Hayes. M." Michael's gaze drifted toward the window again, to the gray world beyond the glass. "Find her," he said quietly. It took Marjorie less than a day to locate the Hayes family. Asheville wasn't a big town, and the address came up quickly, an old apartment above a laundromat, the kind with chipped paint and the steady hum of machines below. When she handed Michael the file, she said, "She's just a child, sir. Don't make this complicated." Michael didn't answer. He only looked at the small photograph clipped to the report. A girl with tangled brown hair, a shy smile, and eyes too serious for her age. Beneath it, the line read, "Lives with mother, Evelyn Hayes. Widowed, works part-time at the diner on 8th Street. That afternoon, he drove there himself. The place was a narrow, whitewashed diner with a flickering neon sign, Sonny's Breakfast, and more. The windows steamed from inside, and the smell of coffee and buttered toast spilled out into the street. Michael stepped in, earning a few glances from regulars unused to seeing a man in a tailored coat at that hour. Evelyn Hayes looked up from behind the counter. She was in her late 30s, her hair tied back loosely, her hands red from dishwater. There was exhaustion in her posture, but also calm dignity, the kind of strength that comes from doing too much for too long. "Can I get you something, sir?" she asked, her voice warm but cautious. Michael hesitated. "Coffee. Black, please." And she nodded and poured him a cup. When she set it down, their eyes met just for a moment, and he realized she was the woman from the night of the storm, the one who had rushed into the community center, breathless, calling for her daughter. "You're Clara's mother," he said quietly. Her hand paused on the counter. "Yes, and you must be Mr. Prescott." He blinked. "She told you?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "She didn't have to." There aren't many little boys named Ethan who ride home in black cars with chauffeurs. He felt a flicker of shame. She was brave. I owe her more than I can say. Clara just did what she thought was right, Evelyn said softly, drying her hands on her apron. She believes every kindness finds its way back. Michael looked at the steaming coffee, the chipped mug, the old radio humming softly on the shelf. She's a remarkable child. She takes after her father, Evelyn said, then paused, as if the words had come out by accident. Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe, or memory. But she quickly changed the subject. She's at school now. I'll tell her you stopped by. Michael nodded, reaching into his coat. He placed an envelope on the counter. For the jacket, and for what she did. Evelyn shook her head before he could finish. We don't take money for kindness, Mr. Prescott. And he hesitated, then tucked the envelope back into his coat. Then at least let me offer her something else, a chance to visit the estate. Ethan hasn't stopped talking about her. Evelyn's smile faltered. That's kind of you, but I'm not sure. Please, he said, his tone gentler now. You'd be my guest. The bell above the door jingled. A customer entered, waving at Evelyn. She glanced toward the man, then back to Michael. I'll think about it. He nodded, understanding that was all he'd get for now. When he stepped outside, the afternoon sun had dipped low, spilling gold over the mountain ridge. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, breathing the crisp air. He didn't realize until then how long it had been since he'd felt something as simple as gratitude. That night, at dinner, Ethan chattered nonstop about Clara, the cookies, the bicycle, the way she'd said everything would be all right. Michael listened, smiling faintly at his son's laughter. The sound filled corners of the house that had been empty for years. After Ethan went to bed, Michael sat alone in his study, the fireplace crackling low. He took out the purple jacket from where it hung near the hearth, folded neatly. The fabric was still frayed at the sleeves, one button missing, but it carried the faint scent of sugar and smoke. He turned it over in his hands, staring into the flames. Outside, the wind swept across the valley, whispering through the pines. For the first time in a long while, Michael didn't feel alone in that great, echoing house. And somewhere across town, a little girl lay awake beside her mother, dreaming of snow, of laughter, and of a boy who had gone home warm because she had stopped when no one else did. The following Saturday dawned bright and clear, a rare break from the long stretch of gray skies that usually lingered over Asheville in winter. From her apartment window above the laundromat, Clara could see the morning light bouncing off the parked cars and puddles below, turning everything gold. The air smelled faintly of detergent and bread. The bakery downstairs had already opened. Her mother had braided her hair neatly that morning, humming softly as she worked. You sure you want to go, sweetheart? Evelyn asked, looping a scarf around Clara's neck. People like the Prescotts. They live in a different world. I promised Ethan, Clara said, holding the small paper bag of cookies she'd baked before sunrise. He said his dad said it's okay. Evelyn sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's cheek. Then remember your manners, okay? Don't touch anything shiny. And say thank you, even when you don't understand what they're offering. Clara nodded solemnly. I'll be good, Mama. By mid-morning, a black car pulled up to the curb. Its glossy finish reflected the faded paint of the laundromat and the tangled electric wires overhead. The driver, an older man in a pressed uniform, stepped out and opened the door for her. Miss Clara? He said politely. Yes, sir. Mr. Prescott asked me to bring you to the estate. Don't you worry, it's not far. She climbed in, clutching her cookie bag tight. Through the window, Asheville rolled by brick buildings, small cafes, street musicians playing old guitars. Then, gradually, the houses grew larger, the streets quieter, the trees taller. When they turned into a private road lined with oaks, her heart began to race. The Prescott mansion looked even grander in daylight. Stone pillars, tall windows, and a wide porch where the morning sun pooled like honey. It didn't look like a house, not really. It looked like a picture in one of those storybooks her teacher read aloud at school. Ethan ran down the steps before the car had even stopped, his laughter echoing across the driveway. Clara, he shouted, you came! She waved back, smiling shyly. I brought cookies. Michael watched from the doorway, one hand tucked into his pocket. He felt an odd warmth seeing his son run so freely. Ethan's laughter had been a rare sound until that week, when Clara stepped out of the car, her boots dusty, her scarf slightly askew. Something in the air shifted. She didn't belong in this world of marble floors and chandeliers, and yet she carried herself with a quiet certainty, as though kindness itself made her fit anywhere. Mrs. Langford met them at the door with a welcoming grin. "Well now, look at you two. Come inside before you freeze." Clara's eyes widened as she stepped through the doorway. The floors gleamed, and sunlight poured through the high windows onto a staircase so wide she could have lain down across it twice. A smell of vanilla and cedar filled the air. "Your house is huge," she whispered to Ethan. "Do you ever get lost?" "Sometimes," he said proudly. "But Dad says I'll grow into it." Michael knelt beside them. "Welcome, Clara," he said softly. "We're glad you came." She blushed under his gaze. "Thank you, sir." He noticed the paper bag she clutched. "What's that?" "Cookies," she said. "For Ethan. And for you." He smiled, the corner of his mouth softening. "Then I'm honored." They spent the morning in the living room, where Ethan showed her his toy trains and a puzzle that stretched across half the coffee table. Clara, careful not to touch anything without asking, listened to him talk about his lessons, his toys, and his dreams of becoming a pilot. When Mrs. Langford brought them cocoa, she gave Clara an extra marshmallow for bravery. Michael sat nearby, reading reports, but not really seeing the words. Every now and then, he glanced up to watch the two children laughing over the puzzle. He hadn't realized how hollow the house had sounded until now. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, he caught himself thinking of Evelyn Hayes again, her composure, her refusal to take money, the way she'd said, "Every kindness finds its way back." He couldn't shake the feeling that their paths were somehow tangled beyond that one night. By noon, the house was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. The children's voices floated down the halls like music, chasing the shadows out of every corner. Clara and Ethan had built a small fortress of cushions by the window, pretending it was a cabin on a snowy mountain. Michael stood at the doorway for a moment, smiling in spite of himself. It was strange, watching his son laugh without hesitation, no nervous glance to check if it was allowed, no quiet retreat when he felt unseen. When the laughter settled into soft giggles, Clara looked up. "Mr. Prescott," she asked timidly, "does Ethan have friends here?" Michael hesitated. "Not many, I'm afraid. We live a little far from town." Clara nodded. "He's really nice. He shouldn't be lonely." The simple statement landed heavier than she could know. Michael's throat tightened. "No, he shouldn't," he said quietly. Mrs. Langford appeared with a tray of sandwiches. "Lunch is ready, dears. Eat up before it gets cold." She gave Clara a wink. "Your cookies are almost gone, sweetheart. That boy of yours can eat." Clara laughed, a bright, pure sound. He promised he'd share. Michael joined them at the table, watching the two children chatter about school, pets, and things only kids find important. He didn't interrupt. It felt good just to listen. After lunch, Clara offered to help Mrs. Langford wash dishes. The older woman waved her off, but Clara insisted. "My mama says when someone feeds you, you help clean." So Mrs. Langford handed her a towel, shaking her head. "Your mama raised you right, sugar." From the hallway, Marjorie Kane watched the scene unfold. She was dressed as always in muted gray, her expression unreadable. "You've brought strangers into your home, Michael," she said later, when the girl had gone back to play. "They're hardly strangers," he replied. "She's a child from 8th Street. You don't know what kind of trouble comes with people like that." He turned sharply. "People like what, Marjorie?" "People who don't live in our world," she said, her voice lower now. "I'm only thinking of Ethan. He's been through enough." Michael's eyes cooled. "He's been through loneliness, Marjorie, not danger. And that little girl saved him from freezing to death." Marjorie's lips pressed into a thin line. "You've always had a soft spot for lost causes." He didn't answer, but the words stayed with him long after she'd left. Outside, the afternoon light faded to gold. Clara and Ethan stood by the porch, watching the first snowflakes fall again. Clara spun in a small circle, catching one on her glove. "Looks like the same kind of snow from the night we met," she said. Ethan grinned. "Maybe snow brings good luck. Or maybe it brings chances to be kind," she said softly. Michael watched them from the window, a faint smile playing at his lips. Then his phone buzzed a call from the office. He turned away, voice flattening as he slipped back into the world he understood. Numbers, meetings, control. When he turned back, the children were laughing in the yard, snowflakes in their hair, their joy echoing through the cold air like something he didn't realize he'd missed. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let it wash over him. The sound, the warmth, the reminder that his life wasn't entirely beyond repair. And inside the house, Marjorie stood in the hallway's dim light, watching the scene through the glass. Her expression was unreadable, but her hand lingered on her phone, already planning to learn more about Evelyn Hayes and the girl who'd walked so easily into her employer's guarded heart. Winter softened over Asheville like a sigh. The sharp winds of December gave way to gentler days, when the sun lingered longer over the hills and the trees shone silver in the early morning frost. The Prescott mansion, once quiet and sterile, now felt different. There were traces of laughter in the air, faint as perfume echoes of two children racing down hallways and of a man who had started to smile again without realizing it. Every Saturday, Clara arrived on her bicycle, her scarf fluttering behind her like a banner. She always brought something, a jar of jam, a bag of cookies, sometimes just a drawing she'd made for Ethan. Mrs. Langford called her the little spark of the house. Even the gardener, old Mr. Taylor, kept a chair ready for her near the kitchen window. One afternoon, as snow melted into rivulets along the stone path, Ethan and Clara sat on the floor of the grand living room, surrounded by art supplies. Between them lay a large sheet of paper with the beginnings of a city drawn in crayons, bridges, houses, parks, all in bright crooked lines. "My house goes here," Clara said, drawing a tiny square near the edge. "Next to the laundromat." Ethan frowned. "But that's too small. You should have a yard." "We don't have one," she replied simply. "But we do have flowers on the window." Michael, standing by the doorway with his coffee, watched the scene with quiet fascination. He'd forgotten how children could fill silence with the sound of possibility. Clara didn't seem impressed by his house or his money. She just treated the place like any other space where kindness could grow. Later, when Evelyn came to pick her up, Michael met her at the door. She looked more tired than before, the color in her cheeks a little paler, but her smile was warm. "I hope she's not overstaying her welcome," Evelyn said. "Quite the opposite," he replied. "She's teaching us things we didn't know we'd forgotten." She tilted her head. "Like what?" He glanced toward the children laughing by the window. "Like how to live without looking at the clock all the time." Evelyn chuckled softly, a sound both bright and weary. "That's a lesson I should probably relearn myself." Before leaving, Clara tugged at Michael's sleeve. "Mr. Prescott, can we do something for my mama next time?" He crouched down to meet her eyes. "Like what?" "She never has a day off," Clara said. "Maybe we can make her lunch, like Mrs. Langford does for us." Michael hesitated, then smiled. "That sounds like a fine idea." The following weekend, they did just that. Ethan stirred the soup while Clara arranged sandwiches on a plate. Mrs. Langford supervised, pretending not to notice when flour dusted the floor. When Evelyn arrived, surprised to find her daughter wearing an oversized apron, Clara proudly presented their meal. "It's chicken noodle, Mama," she said. "We made it all by ourselves." Evelyn's eyes shimmered with something more than amusement. "Then I guess this is the best lunch I've ever had." Michael stood nearby, his hands resting in his pockets. "You'll have to forgive the mess," he said. "I've seen worse," Evelyn replied with a gentle laugh. They ate together in the sunroom, where the light spilled through the windows and the sound of distant church bells drifted up from town. The moment felt ordinary, and yet, for Michael, almost sacred. He hadn't shared a meal like this since before his wife's death. When Evelyn excused herself to take a phone call, Mrs. Langford leaned toward him. "You know, sir, it's been a long time since this house felt like a home." He nodded slowly, his eyes following the two children playing by the window. Maybe it just needed a smaller heart to remind it how. When Evelyn returned from her call, she found Clara outside on the back porch, helping Mr. Taylor water the potted herbs. The old man stood beside her, holding the hose while she sprinkled droplets gently over the mint leaves. "Slow and steady," he said. "Plants don't like being rushed." Clara smiled.
"My mama says people don't either."
Michael joined them, his coat draped loosely over one arm. "She's right," he said, his voice calm. "But it's a lesson most of us forget once we grow up." Mr. Taylor chuckled. "Then maybe this one here ought to teach a class." Clara giggled, and for a moment, the world felt softer, less divided by class or circumstance. Just 3 people and a little girl surrounded by green and winter light. Evelyn leaned against the porch post, watching the scene. The contrast between them, her daughter's laughter and the tall man in the tailored coat, felt almost surreal. She had known kindness before, but not like this. Not from someone who seemed built entirely out of restraint. It made her uneasy, though she couldn't quite say why. When they prepared to leave, Michael walked them to the car. The late afternoon sun slanted gold across the driveway. "Clara," he said, "you're welcome here any time." "Thank you, sir," she said politely, then added with a grin, "but next time I'll bring more cookies. Ethan eats too fast." He laughed a real, unguarded laugh that startled even him. "I'll keep that in mind." Evelyn buckled Clara into the passenger seat and turned to face him. "I appreciate what you're doing, Mr. Prescott," she said quietly, "but I can't let Clara get used to things we can't give her at home." Michael hesitated. "She's not here for things, Miss Hayes. She's here because she makes my son happy. And maybe because she reminds me what I'm supposed to be teaching him." Her expression softened. "And what's that?" He looked at the small figure in the car, waving through the window. "That kindness isn't weakness," he said. "It's strength most people forget how to use." Evelyn said nothing. The silence between them was filled with the soft hum of the engine and the cry of a hawk somewhere beyond the trees. When she finally nodded, it wasn't in agreement so much as in quiet understanding. As the car pulled away, Michael stood in the drive until the sound faded into the distance. The winter sun dipped behind the ridge, turning the sky the color of ash and gold. Inside the house, Mrs. Langford found him still standing there. "They're good people," she said simply. He nodded. "Yes, maybe better than most." That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Michael sat at his desk, scrolling through old photographs. One showed him and his late wife at a community fundraiser years ago, before grief had hollowed him out, before money had become a shield. He thought of Evelyn's quiet strength, of Clara's laughter at his halls, and wondered how such warmth could come from people who had so little. In her apartment across town, Evelyn tucked Clara into bed. "Did you have fun today?" she asked. "Yes," Clara said, sleepy but smiling. "Mr. Prescott said kindness is strength. Do you think that's true, Mama?" Evelyn brushed a hand through her daughter's hair. "It's the truest thing there is." Clara closed her eyes, content. Outside, the city glowed faintly under a thin veil of frost. Somewhere beyond that, a man who had forgotten how to feel was beginning to remember. And under the same quiet sky, both homes, one rich, one poor, breathed a little warmer that night. The first signs of spring came early that year. The dogwoods along the Blue Ridge Parkway bloomed pale pink, and the air smelled faintly of rain and soil. Yet inside Michael Prescott's chest, a quiet unease had begun to grow, an echo of something he couldn't name. Ethan had been brighter than ever, his laughter filling the house. But Michael caught himself staring out the window more often, wondering why the joy that filled his son didn't quite reach him. Maybe because joy demanded trust, and trust had always come hard to him. One gray morning, Marjorie Kane arrived unannounced. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble foyer as she stepped inside, her expression taut beneath polite concern. "I've been meaning to talk to you," she said. "It's about that little girl, Clara." Michael set down his coffee, already weary. "What about her?" "I made a few calls," she said. 8th Street isn't a safe part of town. And her mother, Evelyn Hayes. Did you know she used to work at the hospital downtown? She quit suddenly last year. There's talk she owes money. You really should be more careful who you invite into your home." He stared at her. "You investigated them?" "I simply asked around," Marjorie said coolly. "For your son's sake." Michael's voice dropped. "You've crossed a line, Marjorie. They've done nothing wrong." "People always have reasons," she replied softly, "especially when they show up in your life so conveniently." He turned away, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of an argument, but her words clung to him like smoke. That evening, after putting Ethan to bed, he searched Evelyn's name online. He found little: an old nursing license, a hospital fundraiser photo, a record of her address. Nothing alarming, nothing suspicious. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. 2 days later, Clara arrived later than usual, her bike chain squeaking faintly as she rolled into the driveway. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed. "Everything all right, Clara?" Michael asked. She hesitated. "Mama didn't sleep much. The medicine makes her tired." He knelt to meet her gaze. "Is she sick?" She says it's just her lungs acting up again, Clara murmured. But she still went to work today. Something in Michael shifted an ache that wasn't pity, but recognition. The quiet suffering of people who carried more than their share. That night, he called Evelyn under the pretense of thanking her for the cookies Clara had brought. Her voice sounded weaker than he remembered. "I'm fine, Mr. Prescott," she said when he asked. "Just a cold. Nothing more." He almost believed her. But the next day, when Clara arrived alone again, he made a decision. "Ethan," he said, "how would you feel if we visited Clara's home today?" Ethan's eyes lit up. "Really? She's been asking me to see her street." They drove across town that afternoon, leaving the manicured hills behind for cracked sidewalks and weathered buildings. Clara led them proudly, pushing her bicycle alongside the car until they stopped before a small apartment complex that leaned slightly with age. "It's not big," she said, "but Mama says it's ours, and that makes it special." "Oh." Michael stepped out, the air thick with the scent of rain-soaked pavement and cooking oil from the diner nearby. A woman in a red sweater was sweeping the stoop next door and nodded politely. "You're the Prescotts?" she asked. "Evelyn talks about your boy all the time." Inside, Evelyn greeted them with surprise that quickly turned to embarrassment. "You didn't have to come all this way," she said, glancing at the peeling wallpaper. "I wanted to," Michael replied gently. "You've welcomed my son into your lives. It's time we returned the favor." Evelyn tried to smile, but her hand trembled slightly as she poured tea. "It's not much," she murmured. He looked around the small living room, modest but clean, filled with soft signs of care. A vase of wildflowers, a crocheted blanket, Clara's drawings pinned to the wall. He saw, for the first time, what making do really looked like. "You've built something beautiful here," he said quietly. "Don't ever think otherwise." Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes shining with something fragile. "You don't have to be kind, Mr. Prescott. I know what people say." He frowned. "What people?" She shook her head, but didn't answer. And as they sat there, the warmth between them mixed with unspoken tension, his growing curiosity, her quiet fear that he'd discovered too much. Outside, a storm began to gather over Asheville, thunder rolling softly in the distance, hinting that something far larger was coming. The rain started that night, soft at first, then steady, washing over the rooftops and pooling in the narrow streets outside Evelyn's apartment. Inside, the small lamp on the table flickered, its light catching the weariness in her face. Michael sat across from her, a cup of untouched tea cooling in his hands. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "you should have told me you weren't well." She looked away, the lines of exhaustion etched deep around her mouth. "It's nothing serious. The doctor says it's manageable." "Manageable doesn't mean you should face it alone," he replied, his tone softer now. Evelyn's shoulders stiffened. "I'm not your responsibility, Mr. Prescott, and neither is Clara. We're fine." He studied her for a long moment, the defensiveness, the pride, and beneath it, a quiet fear. "You remind me of myself," he said finally. "Always pretending the house isn't on fire because you're too proud to ask for water." That caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her eyes glistening. "You think money fixes everything, but it doesn't. It just hides what's broken." Michael's reply came low, almost like confession. "I know that better than you think." The silence between them stretched until the sound of Clara's laughter drifted in from the next room. She and Ethan were building a fort out of couch cushions, arguing about whether dragons could breathe ice instead of fire. Evelyn smiled faintly. "She likes your boy. He brings out the best in her." "He does the same for me," Michael admitted. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Evelyn stood to close the window, then stumbled slightly. Michael caught her arm before she could fall. The contact startled them both, her trembling under his touch, his hand steady but unsure. "You need rest," he said. She nodded weakly, sinking back into the chair. "I'll be fine in the morning." He didn't believe it, but said nothing. Instead, he looked around the apartment again, the peeling paint, the worn furniture, the framed photo of a man on the shelf. Something about the man's face, his eyes, the tilt of his jaw stirred an odd familiarity. "Your husband?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated. "He's gone." "I'm sorry." She gave a small nod, her gaze distant. "He wasn't an easy man to love." The words lingered in the room like a shadow, heavy with untold pain. Later that evening, as Michael and Ethan prepared to leave, Clara ran out to the car barefoot, waving a small plastic dinosaur.
For Ethan,
She said.
so he won't forget me until next time.
Ethan took it solemnly. I won't. Michael smiled and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. We'll see you soon, Clara. M? But as they drove away, he couldn't shake the image of Evelyn's face in the dim light or the photograph on the shelf. Something about it unsettled him, though he couldn't yet name why. When they reached home, Marjorie was waiting in the foyer, arms crossed. You were gone all afternoon, she said coldly. With her? Michael's patience thinned. Her name is Evelyn, and if you're about to repeat more gossip, don't. She pursed her lips. You deserve to know who you're letting into your life. There are things about that woman you don't understand. He turned away. Then let me find out for myself. Marjorie's voice followed him up the stairs, sharp and cold. Just don't say I didn't warn you when the truth comes out. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He poured himself a glass of bourbon and stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. His reflection looked older than he remembered, haunted, perhaps, by too many second chances. Downstairs, the house was silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock. But in his mind, the questions grew louder. Who was Evelyn Hayes, really? Why did her past feel so close to his own? Outside, the storm gathered strength, and somewhere in that same city, a past neither of them had spoken of was beginning to stir. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Michael's study, but he barely noticed. On his desk lay a printed photograph, the man from Evelyn's shelf. Sharp jaw, tired eyes, the faint smile of someone who'd lived too hard. Michael had seen that face before. He searched through old company files, dust rising as he opened a worn folder marked Blackwell Construction, 2012, Employee Misconduct. There it was, James Hayes, fired for falsifying invoices. And at the bottom, his own signature. Michael sat back, stunned. So this was the man Evelyn had lost, the man whose name he had signed away years ago. The discovery felt like fate's cruel joke. The woman and child who'd brought life into his house were tied to the darkest chapter of his career. That afternoon, unable to keep the truth inside, he drove to the small clinic where Evelyn worked. The place smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. When she saw him at the door, her face brightened, then quickly clouded with worry. Michael, is Ethan all right? He's fine, he said quietly. I came to talk about something else. Ifernell. In the small staff lounge, he placed the photograph on the table between them. Your husband, James Hayes. I knew him. Her breath caught. You what? He worked for me. Years ago. At one of my construction sites. Evelyn froze. Then you're the one who fired him. He nodded, the memory heavy. He was accused of falsifying company records. I could have pressed charges, but didn't. I thought I was doing him a favor. Her voice trembled. He told me he was innocent, that his boss ruined his name to cover his own mistakes. Michael's chest tightened. He lied to you. Her eyes flashed with pain. And you're sure you never did? He exhaled, long and low. Maybe I didn't look close enough. Maybe I just needed someone to blame. Silence filled the small room, heavy, suffocating. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows. I didn't know who you were, she whispered. When Clara met Ethan, I just thought it was a blessing. When I found out later, I didn't know how to tell you. You could have told me the truth. I was afraid, she said, her voice breaking. Afraid you'd see me as part of what he did. I didn't want Clara punished for his choices. Michael's voice softened. You and I, we both built our lives on silence. Maybe it's time we stop hiding from it. Evelyn lowered her head. He wasn't a bad man, not at first. But the shame changed him. When he died, I thought the past had gone with him. I was wrong. He nodded slowly. The past never really leaves us, but maybe this time we can decide what it means. For a long moment, neither moved. The rain softened to a whisper, and in that quiet space, guilt began to loosen its grip. When Michael finally rose to leave, Evelyn reached out and touched his hand, hesitant, grateful. I'm sorry, she whispered. So am I, he said. But maybe this isn't the end of the story. Maybe it's the part where we start making things right. Eh. Outside, the rain stopped. Light broke through the clouds, scattering across the wet pavement like small pieces of forgiveness. Spring came slowly to Asheville, the kind that carried the scent of earth after rain and the sound of birds nesting in the eaves. The Prescott estate was no longer quiet. Children's voices echoed through the garden, laughter blending with the rustle of new leaves. Michael stood at the study window, watching Ethan and Clara chase each other across the yard. It had been 3 weeks since his talk with Evelyn at the clinic. He hadn't spoken about it since, but something had shifted in him. The brittle edges inside had softened. The silence in his home no longer felt heavy. It felt like peace waiting to be filled. Mrs. Langford noticed it first.
You've been smiling more, sir,
she said one morning as she poured coffee. Have I? He replied, half amused. You have, she said with a knowing look. Maybe that little girl taught you something the rest of us couldn't, he chuckled. Maybe she did. That afternoon, Evelyn and Clara arrived for Sunday lunch. The sky was bright, the kind of blue that made even the old stone house seem less severe. Michael had insisted they stay not out of guilt, but because he wanted them there. They ate on the back porch overlooking the hills. Ethan told stories about school. Clara interrupted with corrections, and Evelyn laughed a sound Michael had grown to crave. After the meal, as the children ran off toward the garden, Evelyn lingered by the railing, gazing at the distant mountains. You've got a beautiful view here, she said. I used to think so, Michael replied. Now I realize it's even better when you have someone to share it with. She smiled faintly, though her eyes still carried the caution of someone who'd learned not to expect too much.
You don't have to keep proving you're a good man, Michael. You already have.
He turned toward her. It's not about proving anything. It's about finally understanding what matters. A silence settled between them, not awkward, but fragile, like glass catching light. Evelyn looked down, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. Clara keeps asking if she and Ethan can spend the summer together. I wasn't sure how you'd feel about that. I'd like that very much, he said without hesitation. And I think they both need it. Evelyn nodded, relief flickering across her face. But before she could speak again, a voice interrupted. Mr. Prescott? It was Marjorie Kane, her heels clicking sharply on the porch steps. She looked out of place among the sunlight and laughter, her gray suit stiff against the soft green of spring. I didn't realize you had company. Evelyn straightened. Good afternoon, Miss Kane. Marjorie's smile was thin. Mrs. Hayes. Her gaze flicked toward Michael. May I have a moment? Michael's expression cooled. If it's business, it can wait. Yeah, it's personal, she said. It concerns your guest. Evelyn's hand tightened on the railing. Marjorie, Michael warned, this isn't the time. But she pressed on. You deserve to know the full truth before you make any more mistakes. I did some checking. James Hayes wasn't just an employee. He had ties to the fraud case that nearly ruined you years ago. Michael's jaw clenched. Enough. Marjorie ignored him. He stole from you, Michael, and now his widow is living off your kindness. Don't you see how that looks? Evelyn went pale. That's not true. Marjorie's voice sharpened. You kept it from him, didn't you? You let your daughter grow close to his son, to his money, without saying a word. The accusation hung in the air, cruel and cold. Clara and Ethan had stopped running, standing frozen at the edge of the porch. Michael stepped forward, his voice low but steady. Marjorie, leave, now. You're blinded by guilt, she snapped. I'm trying to protect you. He met her eyes, calm but unwavering. If protection means poisoning kindness, I don't need it. Marjorie's face hardened. You'll regret this. She turned sharply and walked back down the steps, her heels striking like gunshots against the stone. The silence that followed was unbearable. Evelyn's hands trembled as she whispered, I didn't ask for your pity, Michael. I never wanted... He interrupted softly. You don't owe me an explanation. But she shook her head, tears welling. Yes, I do. Because what she said, part of it's true. Michael's breath caught. What do you mean? Evelyn took a step back, her voice breaking. James stole from you. He lied to me about it for years. When I found out, I was pregnant. I thought about coming forward, but I was scared. I was ashamed. She looked away, her tears finally falling. I didn't mean to hide it from you. I just didn't want Clara to pay for what he did. Michael closed his eyes, the weight of her words pressing down. But when he opened them again, there was no anger. Only understanding. You and I, he said quietly. We've both been running from ghosts. Maybe it's time we stop. Evelyn stared at him, uncertain. You can still look at me after hearing that? He managed a small smile. Evelyn, you didn't take anything from me. You gave my son back his laughter. And I think maybe that's worth more than any money I ever lost. The tension broke like a storm passing. Evelyn's tears turned to quiet sobs of relief. And for the first time, Michael reached out not as a man offering charity, but as a friend reaching across years of regret. In the garden below, Clara looked at Ethan. Is your dad mad? Ethan shook his head. No, I think he's forgiving. The sun dipped low behind the hills, washing the porch in soft amber light. Evelyn stood quietly by the railing, her hands trembling, while Michael watched from a few steps away, calm, steady, waiting. I've carried James's mistakes for years, she whispered. I thought if I worked hard enough, I could erase what he did. Michael shook his head gently. You didn't take anything from me, Evelyn. You gave something back, hope. She looked at him, startled. You don't hate me? No, he said. Because I understand you. Maybe too well. Down in the garden, Clara and Ethan ran through the grass, their laughter light and clear. Clara picked a handful of wildflowers and ran to her mother. Here, Mama, so you won't be sad anymore. Evelyn knelt, tears shining in her eyes. I'm not sad anymore, sweetheart. Michael smiled, watching them. For a moment, everything, the guilt, the years, the silence, felt lighter. When Evelyn turned to leave, she said softly, Thank you, Michael, for forgiving what I couldn't. He nodded. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to see someone's heart instead of their mistakes. As her car disappeared down the winding drive, the air grew still. Ethan tugged his father's sleeve. Dad, are we okay now? Michael looked toward the horizon where the first evening star began to shine. Yes, son, he said quietly. We finally are. Summer unfolded gently across Asheville. The air carried the scent of blooming magnolias, and laughter returned to the Prescott estate like a song once forgotten. Where silence once lingered, life now hummed, steady, tender, alive. Michael stood on the back porch early one morning, coffee in hand, watching the two children chase butterflies through the garden. Clara's voice rang clear, her hair glinting in the sunlight. Ethan followed behind, pretending to be a knight guarding a princess. Their innocence was disarming. It made the world feel simple again. Inside, Evelyn was helping Mrs. Langford in the kitchen, slicing fruit for breakfast. The two women had grown unexpectedly close. You're spoiling him, you know, Mrs. Langford teased. Evelyn smiled softly. I think we're all just learning how to live again. Michael entered a few minutes later, sleeves rolled, looking far less like the CEO who once ruled every meeting and far more like a man learning to breathe. You two plotting against me already? He joked. Mrs. Langford smirked. Just keeping you humble, sir. Evelyn laughed, a sound that no longer hid behind caution. The breakfast table was a portrait of quiet joy. Clara told stories between bites of toast. Ethan tried to explain how clouds made rain. And Michael listened, really listened. For once, he wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or the past. He was thinking about now. After breakfast, Evelyn stepped outside with him. The air shimmered with heat, cicadas humming in the distance. You've changed, she said quietly. Michael smiled. Or maybe I just remembered who I was supposed to be. She studied him for a moment, then said, Do you ever regret not pressing charges against James? He shook his head. I used to. I thought mercy made me weak. But now I think punishment isn't always justice. She looked down, thoughtful. Clara still asks about her father sometimes. I tell her he made mistakes, but he loved her. That's enough, he said gently. Love's the part that matters. For a while, they stood in companionable silence, watching the children draw shapes in the dirt with sticks. Then Evelyn turned to him. You've done so much for us, Michael. I don't know how to repay you. He met her eyes, his voice quiet but firm. You already have. You taught me that forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it gives it purpose. The words lingered between them, soft, and real. That afternoon, the town held its annual summer fair at Pack Square Park Music. Homemade pies, laughter filling the warm air. Michael offered to drive everyone there. It was the first time in years he'd been part of something so ordinary, so human. At the fair, Ethan won a stuffed bear at the ring toss. Clara danced to a country tune played by a local band. Evelyn watched them, her eyes bright with pride. "They look happy," she said. "They are," Michael replied, "and so am I." They shared a bench under the shade of a maple tree, a light breeze carrying the scent of popcorn and grass. For the first time, they talked easily about childhood, about loss, about how both could shape a person without defining them. Then suddenly, Clara came running toward them, holding a small handmade bracelet. "I made it!" she exclaimed. "One for each of us, a family bracelet." Michael smiled, touched. "A family, huh?" Clara nodded, sliding one onto his wrist. "You too, Mr. Prescott. You're part of us now." The simple gesture unraveled something deep inside him, years of distance, guilt, and silence dissolving in the warmth of a child's certainty. He looked at Evelyn. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. When they drove home that evening, the car was filled with laughter and music. The wind through the open windows carried a kind of peace that Michael hadn't known in decades. For once, the road ahead didn't look lonely. It looked like a beginning. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Michael walked out to the porch. The crickets sang, and the air was sweet with honeysuckle. He sat quietly, thinking about the strange path that had brought them all here, the choices, the losses, the small mercies that had led to this fragile happiness. And as the moon climbed high above the valley, he finally understood. Redemption wasn't something you achieved. It was something you chose again and again every time you opened your heart when it would have been easier to close it. A few weeks later, summer reached its brightest days. The Prescott home no longer felt like a monument of silence, but a living place where warmth lingered in every hallway. Ethan's laughter echoed through the garden, while Clara helped Mrs. Langford bake peach pies for the church fundraiser. Evelyn often stayed late, helping with paperwork or simply sharing coffee on the porch with Michael when the kids had gone to bed. One evening, as the sky burned orange, Michael found Evelyn sitting outside, staring at the horizon. "You've been quiet," he said gently. She smiled faintly. "I've been thinking how strange it feels to have peace again." He sat beside her. "Strange isn't bad. Sometimes it's just new," she nodded. "I spent years surviving day by day, but now Clara has a future I can see, not just imagine." Michael looked toward the children chasing fireflies on the lawn. "And so do we," he said quietly. Evelyn turned to him. "We?" He met her gaze. "All of us. Whatever this is, it's real. It's a family, the kind we both thought we'd lost." Her eyes softened. "You think people like us deserve another chance?" "I think forgiveness is the second chance," he said. The screen door creaked open. Clara appeared, clutching a jar filled with glowing light. "Look, we caught stars." Ethan followed behind her, barefoot and grinning. "They're not stars, Clara. They're fireflies." Evelyn laughed, standing to admire their treasure. "Then let's keep them for a moment before setting them free." Michael crouched beside the children, the glow from the jar reflecting in his eyes. "You know," he said softly, "fireflies only shine because the dark gives them space to." Clara looked at him, puzzled. "So darkness is good?" "Sometimes," he answered, smiling. "It helps us remember what light looks like." Later, after the children were asleep, Evelyn lingered by the door. "Thank you, Michael," she said quietly, "for everything. Not the house or the help, but for believing that broken things can still belong somewhere." He reached for her hand, not in romance, but in deep understanding. "You and Clara didn't just belong here," he said. "You brought this place back to life." She squeezed his hand lightly. "Maybe we all saved each other." That night, the house felt different, not just rebuilt, but reborn. The old photographs on the mantel no longer looked like ghosts. The air smelled of peach pie and laughter. Even the silence, once heavy and cold, now carried warmth. Weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, the four of them walked to the park near the church. Ethan carried the same little dinosaur Clara had given him months ago. Clara skipped ahead, holding Evelyn's hand, while Michael followed, his heart lighter than it had been in years. When they reached the small hill overlooking the town, Evelyn stopped and looked around. "Funny," she said softly. "It feels like home." Michael smiled. "That's because it is. Emsel." The church bells rang in the distance, and the wind swept gently through the fields, not like an ending, but like a beginning written in the language of forgiveness. For a long while, none of them spoke. They didn't need to. Some stories end quietly, not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with the simple peace of people choosing to stay. And there, under the soft morning sun, a man once haunted by loss, a woman once defined by guilt, and two children who had unknowingly mended both stood together, a family reborn. Sometimes, life gives us second chances in the quietest ways, not through grand gestures, but through small acts of kindness that open doors we thought were locked forever. In the soft light of an ordinary morning, Michael found laughter again in a child's voice. Evelyn discovered peace after years of guilt, and two little hearts reminded them both that family isn't defined by blood, but by love freely given. This story isn't about wealth, mistakes, or forgiveness alone. It's about rediscovering what truly matters when the noise fades. Because love, once shared, never really disappears. It only waits for courage to call it home again. The lesson is simple yet timeless. Kindness can change the course of a life. Everyone deserves love and a place to belong. Happiness doesn't live in mansions or fortunes. It grows in hearts, willing to forgive and begin again. Like the porch light left on for someone returning late at night, a single act of goodness can still guide us through the darkest roads. Maybe you've felt that too, in a smile across the dinner table, in the sound of your grandchild's laughter, or in the quiet peace that follows an old apology finally spoken. Life has a way of mending itself when we let compassion lead. So tonight, take a moment to think about who brought light into your life and who might still be waiting for yours. If this story touched your heart, leave a 1-inch the comments. If you think there's something we could have told better, press 0 and share your thoughts. Because stories like this one aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be felt together.